You know, I will never complain about Gunnock having a lack of lines in Zero Base One songs. Not only because I think he gets a perfectly acceptable number of lines, but also because, as much as, yes, I do obviously want him to be the centre, I also know that, one, he was favoured by Mnet, and thus I know they like him. I mean, they literally rigged him into the group. Two, he can sing, dance, and rap, thus will get more lines and centre time by virtue of versatility. And three, regardless of the number of lines he gets, he still gets to be in the group and performing, and that's what he seemed to really want and be excited about. As I've said before, as long as he's happy, I'm happy, and I'm pretty sure he's happy. But just because I won't complain about his lines doesn't mean I don't want him to get more lines. Duh, literally who doesn't want their bias to get more lines, as long as their bias isn't soul? So when Gunnock got his song to shine, I was of course delighted to see that not only did he get a chance to shine, but it was also in a song that I personally adored, with a concept I found interesting and compelling. And most of all, it did probably my favourite thing for a K-pop song to do, used visual and other storytelling shortcuts to add depth. Yes, visual and storytelling shortcuts will certainly be a massive theme on this channel, and especially in analysis videos. Now, it may surprise you to hear this, but I'm a fan of Shakespeare. Fortunately for me being a fan of Shakespeare, the main reference was, obviously, Shakespeare. Unfortunately for me, said Shakespeare reference was my single least favourite play of his, Romeo and Juliet. For the record, I think Macbeth and Othello are far superior. But just because Romeo and Juliet is my least favourite Shakespeare play doesn't mean I don't love and appreciate it, and doesn't lessen the huge impact it's had on our society. Anyway, yes, I do like this song. A lot, and it quickly rose to the top of my favourite Zero Base One songs list. Mind you, that's not saying much, since I'm ashamed to admit that I'm less a fan of Zero Base One's music and more a fan of them as a group, and of their legacy. And of course, of Gunnock. I swear, I still like the music, guys, but I'd like Gunnock no matter which group he was in or how brilliant or trash their music was. In this video, I'll give a brief overview of the Best Songs series, considering this is the first installment, and then we'll discuss the background and history of Kill Romeo as a song and the Cinema Paradise album in general. Then, of course, we'll take a look at the lyrics, choreography, styling, and concept of the song, and key performances, most notably, as you'd expect, Mama. Then I'll discuss fan theories for the song and we'll touch on the album, and we'll conclude by discussing why I think the song deserves to be on this list of best songs. Thankfully for both me and you, the trigger warnings for this video are pretty predictable. This is Romeo and Juliet, guys, so murder and suicide are obvious, and also gun violence, considering we'll be talking about modern adaptations too. So let's get into it. Why this song? What is the best? This is pretty simple, so let's keep it brief. The best songs in this series fulfill many of the same requirements as the best albums and best debuts in those series. They are cohesive, have interesting, unique, and deep concepts, use visual and other storytelling shortcuts, and help define a group's image or otherwise contribute to it. However, they're best songs, not best albums, either because they don't come as part of an album, or because the rest of the album is either uninteresting to me, or arguably more objectively lacking in comparison to the best song. For example, also in this series I want to discuss Cosmossy's Lucky One. Lucky One is only a single, so obviously can't be a best album, although it is also a best debut. In terms of songs where the rest of the album is lacking, either objectively or subjectively, well, of course we have the subject of today's installment, Kill Romeo. Yes, the rest of the Cinema Paradise album is good, sure, but it's not nearly as interesting or cohesive as Kill Romeo is by itself. The idea of the album is ostensibly to reference important cinematic contributions to culture, right? But the album doesn't really seem to do this, so it falls flat right from the first thing you see of it, its name. In comparison to the rest of the album, to the album's concept, and to the title track, Good So Bad, Kill the Romeo is just infinitely better and really should have been the title track. Another example of a lacking album for very different reasons is Kepler's Yum. Yes, Kepler actually get to make it onto this list! Because miraculously, after I made an entire episode complaining about their concept, and then they didn't really fix it with their first OT7 comeback, they did fix it with their first OT7 Japanese release. Oof. I'll shut up about it for now because this isn't the Yum video, but like, Yum is what Kepler should have been the whole time, and it's so good it's depressing. Or is it good so bad? Although for now Yum and Lucky One are the only other songs on my list for this series, I have no doubt I'll encounter more interesting songs I'll want to include. For instance, I may well discuss some Plave, Superkind and 17 tracks in this series, and maybe also Idol and Stray Kids. And Team will almost certainly end up here by virtue of them releasing a lot of singles. Oh dear, the perils of being a multi-stan. So now that you're oriented on this series, let's also get oriented on the song. Kill the Romeo is part of the Cinema Paradise album, so although this video isn't about the album, I will discuss the success and release of the song partially in relation to Cinema Paradise. So, Cinema Paradise was first teased in July 2024, around Zero Base One's first anniversary. The album was then teased through concept films and the blank bad film, reflecting a trend in the album of fans having to fill in the blanks for song titles. Each of the songs on the album was also teased with a movie-style poster. Here is Kill the Romeos. The album was released on August 26th, 2024. I can't believe it's been almost a year already. And, as with all of Zero Base One's albums, quickly became very successful. It held a peak Korean album chart position of 1 and a peak Japanese chart position of 4. The Japanese chart position was a drop from their previous album, You Had Me at Hello, which peaked at number 2, but was still very solid, and considering they went back to charting first in Japan with their next release, Blue Paradise, I don't think this was at all a sign of a potential downfall. As far as sales, the album had 870,000 first-day sales, and ended up selling a total of 1,166,000 copies, less than their previous albums but still well above 1 million copies, of course making it a certified 1 million seller by the KMCA. Need I remind you that Zero Base One are the only K-pop group in history to have sold over 1 million albums for every single Korean album release. Anyway, Zero Base One got 5 music show wins with Good So Bad, making this album their most successful on music shows. Unfortunately, they didn't get any wins for Kill the Romeo, which is a crime, but which is also understandable, considering getting wins with B-sides is unusual. At time of writing this, oh wait, so let me check that. GP999. I also liked GP999. Oh, I'm so happy people are commenting on my videos. Oh my goodness, what's wrong with me? At time of writing this script, the music video for Good So Bad has 45 million views, and Good So Bad has almost 24 million streams on Spotify. In comparison, Kill the Romeo, sadly, only has 8.7 million. I mean, to be fair, that's a lot, and it is a B-side, so naturally would have far less streams than the title track. But it's also unusually understreamed for a promoted B-side, because it's not even the second most streamed track on the album. Insomnia beats it there with 9.5 million streams. Oh dear, it seems the conceptual tracks are destined to be underrated in K-pop, but that's a tale as old as the industry itself. Interestingly enough, when I'm recording this video, it seems like Kill the Romeo is accelerating in streams, certainly a lot faster than Insomnia. Insomnia is still around the same number of streams, but Kill the Romeo's made it to 9 million, so that's just an interesting fact for you. So, in the grand scheme of the industry, Kill the Romeo is very successful, but of course it is a B-side and pales in success metrics in comparison to Good So Bad, which is to be expected. So with that said, let's talk about the track itself. Let's get into the nitty-gritty of Kill the Romeo. In this segment, as in my previous analysis video, I'll go through the actual analysis of the song, the lyrics, and then the choreography. Then I'll discuss performances for the song, most of which will be their mama performance of it, and we'll take a look at some general aspects of it and some general things I like. So let's get into it, starting with the lyrics. Welcome to my new lyric layout. I hadn't previously had a chance to analyse the lyrics of this song, considering, well, when I was running my theory blogs, not only did I not have a Zero Base 1-1, but I mean, Boys Planet hadn't even aired yet, let alone debuted the group or released this album. For this one, I used the Genius lyrics to tell me which part of the song was what, since yours truly knows nothing about music. That also means that some of my screenshots have the remnants of their member coding system, like little asterisks. I used blue for more general references to Romeo and Juliet, and red for more creepy gothic ones. So let's talk about the song in general. Kill the Romeo is about what else? Romeo and Juliet, duh. Thus, the song is packed full of references to Romeo and Juliet, and to the fact that it's a play. For instance, the members show awareness that they are part of a play and are rewriting the story of it. We'll get into all of these references later, and I'll explain more of them later, but I have one main one I want to discuss in advance. Fascinatingly, considering this is a 3-minute song, not a play or film or whatever else, the song actually follows the same 5-act structure that Shakespeare uses in his plays. For those sad members of my audience who never had a chance to study Shakespeare in English class, the 5-act structure is used by Shakespeare in his plays, and depending on the type of play it is, we can use this structure to predict the events of the play. Shakespeare wrote 3 kinds of plays: histories, comedies, and tragedies. Histories are what they sound like. Comedies aren't exactly what they sound like. Yes, they're funny, but they're also romantic, and as you can see from plays like A Midsummer Night's Dream, they end up with everyone getting together. Tragedies are what they sound like, tragedies, aka everyone dies. Romeo and Juliet is famously a tragedy, but there are some important things I need you to know about tragedies outside of everyone dies. Tragedies are built on the main character having a hamartia, or a fatal flaw, a word that a lot of people around my age probably only heard of via The Fault in Our Stars. In Act 1, we have the introduction of the setting, the general plot, and the hero, as well as some hints as to their hamartia. Act 2 sees the rising action, and in Act 3 the hero seems primed to overcome their hamartia, but in the end fails to. Acts 4 and 5 show the fallout of this failure to overcome their hamartia, and everything starts going wrong, leading to a downward spiral to the end where a whole bunch of people, including our hero or main character, die as a result of said main character's actions. Then we usually have a side character show up and tell us how terrible it was that the main character fell to their hamartia, and about what happens afterwards. Remember this structure. My favourite examples of hamartias are, unsurprisingly, Othello and Macbeth. Macbeth's hamartia is his ambition, and his ambition leads him to becoming a paranoid tyrannical ruler who is killed when he's overthrown by the true prince. Othello's hamartia is his jealousy and rage. In the play, he's manipulated into believing his fiancée, I guess, is cheating on him, and in a fit of rage kills her. Now, despite what the literal name of the play may suggest, the real main character of Romeo and Juliet is Romeo alone, and his hamartia is his impulsiveness. That's what leads him to fall quickly in love with massive quotation marks, with Juliet. It's what leads him to marry Juliet secretly within a day, and then to kill Tybalt in a fit of rage, which in turn leads to his exile. It's also what leads to him deciding that the best option for him is to kill himself, and thus doing it and killing Paris in the process at the end of the play. Something that directly leads to Juliet killing herself. Basically, if Romeo wasn't impulsive, everyone would still be alive. And he almost overcomes this in Act 3 before everything goes downhill. Another important thing to consider is the nature of Romeo and Juliet as a story. There's a decent amount of debate online about whether Shakespeare intended it to be a love story or a criticism of how quickly they fell in love. I mean, especially considering Juliet was 13 and Romeo was anywhere from 15 to 21. Was it really love? My opinion, having done a bit of research and considering, the nature of age gap relationships during Shakespeare's era, is not a very interesting one, but is also a very common one. He wasn't criticising their love or the fact that they fell in love quickly, and he doesn't have an issue with the age gap, but he was criticising Romeo's impulsiveness and the feud between the families. The end of the play, a discussion between Montague Capulet and the prince, as much as confirms this. Their love is romanticised, literally, and it is referred to as love. The real tragedy of the story is painted as the feud between the families. Now, a lot of people do have a good point in this discussion, that we as a society romanticise the story of Romeo and Juliet and hold it up as the example of romance and true love when 1, it's a tragedy, 2, it's an inappropriate relationship, and 3, it's not even a good romance considering they fall, quote, in love and then kill themselves for each other in only a few days. The creepy and unsettling nature of Romeo and Juliet is one that very few pieces of media delve into, and Kill the Romeo is, unfortunately, not one of those. That's like its singular flaw. Outside of that rant and important details I want you to remember, like awareness of being in a story and the 5-act structure, I don't have much in summary to say about the lyrics of this one, so let's get into it. After a classic K-pop intro, we get into the first verse, which introduces the first act of the story. How do we know this? Well, first, they literally mention Act 1. But even if they didn't, we would know, since Matthew talks about their excited eyes meeting, and the "you and I believe in this moment" is a clear stand-in for love. Now, they do stuff up one aspect of Romeo and Juliet here. Gunnock and Given sing about waking up and the moonlight. Gunnock specifically has a line about opening the window bathed in the moonlight, which is almost certainly a reference to the iconic Romeo and Juliet scene where the two talk at night after initially making eye contact. Juliet up in the mansion at her window and Romeo below in the gardens. This scene is the moonlight scene, both because it's at night and because it includes their famous exchange about the moon, where Juliet says, "Swear not by the moon, the inconstant moon that monthly changes in her circled orb, lest that thy love prove likewise variable." On one hand, I'm very disappointed that this line was out of order. I feel like this would have been a very easy thing to fix and fact check. On the other hand, considering Gunnock sings the line that most greatly offends the storyline, "I'll forgive you, but you're lucky you're my bias." But putting aside that issue, these lines about the moonlight are interesting, because sure, the moonlight is supposed to be romantic, right? But in Romeo and Juliet, Juliet directly highlights its inconstant nature, making it a far more unsettling image, especially considering their lives change drastically and then they die within a few days of this exchange. So the fact that Zero Base One mention it in a romantic context and also in the context of Kill the Romeo makes it a far more sinister symbol. You can see in my notes that I specifically mentioned false love, but it could also just be impending change, doom, or death. Also, a nighttime romance is good for hiding from your parents who hate each other. Either way, it's clear that Zero Base One themselves believe this is true love, and Eugen leads us into the pre-chorus with the first line about the story, showing his awareness that he's, you guessed it, in a story. The pre-chorus brings in the idea of fate. This makes sense, since it seems that Romeo and Juliet are destined to die, even though they think they're destined to be together. Jung Hao also talks about the nature of being the main character, and shows incredible self-awareness, calling himself the main character of a tragedy. This makes his next line that he'll change everything, 1, make sense in the context of them knowing they're in a story and a tragedy, and 2, potentially full of dramatic irony. If he's the main character, he is Romeo, and Romeo dies despite his attempts to change everything. FYI that Hanbin's first line here is also translated as "like a twist of fate one day," and the end of Jung Hao's first line is also translated as "I'll promise you," not "I'll promise to be there for you." I suppose it doesn't change the meaning much, but I do want to mention it. The chorus is the thing that made me really love this song. Partially the choreography, which I'll talk more about later, but mostly the lyrics. Obviously, Ricky talking about killing Romeo shows their awareness that they're in a story, and the place they seem to take. kind of replacing Romeo with themselves. This is nicely followed up by Jiwing's line, flipped destiny, expressing how they've literally flipped destiny by killing Romeo in Act 1. Flipped destiny was one of my favourite lines, but my real two favourite lines in this song are the two that follow. It falls like dominoes, no, it's not a tragedy. As soon as I heard that for the first time, I was like, yeah, this song will forever be my favourite Zero Base One song. These two lines have nice dual meaning. Dominoes falling can refer to both the domino effect after Romeo fails to overcome his Hamasha, and the domino effect Zero Base One create after they literally murder the main character. Similarly, it's not a tragedy refers to 1. The fact that it isn't a tragedy that they killed Romeo since they're taking his place, 2. The fact that they don't intend to die or for Juliet to die via subverting the story, and 3 is an ironic reference to the genre of the play, a tragedy. Zero Base One hope to turn this play from a tragedy into a comedy, but will they be successful? I guess we will see. This also reinforces the theme of fighting your own destiny, which was introduced earlier and will continue through the rest of the song. A lot. In fact, it continues right away in the next few lines, deciding their own path with their own hands. Hanbin and Gunnock's shared lines here also have a section which can be alternately translated as, "Forget the Romeo, I'll decide with my own hands the path I'll walk on." Tele begins the post-chorus with lines about running away, which is hilarious since Romeo and Juliet intended to run away together but ended up dying instead. But I guess Tele is convinced that this ending will be different, showing even more awareness of the story and a desire to fight against it. Jung Hao talks about sadness fading, presumably because they ran away, or to do with Romeo being dead, and brings in more self-determination. But he also has a line about being, quote, your own new Romeo, which is self-awareness of being in a story, but also, do you have a death wish? Do you really want to be Romeo? If I was you, I wouldn't. The 3rd, 5th, and 7th lines of this section are also translated as, our ending will be different, sadness will fade away, and a new Romeo just for you, respectively. These just seem to have more certainty to them than the other translation, but I think that's a coincidence. On to the 2nd verse, which given nicely announces is Act 2. Act 2 is unpredictable apparently, but this makes sense since they literally killed Romeo in Act 1. I also really like that he has the line, quote, no cliché. Basically, this whole verse lays the genre awareness on thick. We've got no cliché, Act 2, which is unpredictable, their narrative, the next page, changing the genre, and the main characters and the stage. I particularly like Jiwing talking about changing the genre, presumably from a tragedy to a comedy, and Gunnock's line about being the main characters on the stage. The stage has several meanings. For instance, there is the current physical stage that Zero Base One are literally performing on, and also the stage the play Romeo and Juliet is being performed on. Also, if you subscribe to the idea that Zero Base One have a subtle storyline where they're in a video game moving through stages, Romeo and Juliet is a stage or a level of the game. Yes, please do continue to give Gunnock cool lines, Wake One. Thank you. I have to say, I also like the potential implication in this verse that Zero Base One are looking at a play script and rewriting it as they go, seen through Jiwing's line about changing the page. This foreshadows the power they'll gain from changing the story. Gunnock's line can also be translated as, don't stop, there's no need to pause, baby, which I like as an alternate translation since pausing is something we can do to movies, relevant since this is cinema paradise, and continuing the movie references in the choreography. It does deviate from the stage or play meaning, but it's nice for bringing in different forms of media Romeo and Juliet has been adapted into, and it's a nice tie to both the Cinema Paradise album name and also to, their performances and their actual stages for it. The pre-chorus complains about the fate that's been decided in the script, and how they can't be together. This is a clear reference to the nature of Romeo and Juliet, the two families feuding. Also, fate, destiny, tragedy, so on. I find Tele's line, it's too late to go back now before the moon sets, interesting. There's the too late, which is about something being certain and unchangeable. They can't go back in time now, and they also can't go back to how they used to be. The moon setting is also interesting. They can hide their forbidden romance at night, but in the morning everything will be obvious. This also references the end of the play where the sun rises as everyone realizes that Romeo and Juliet are dead. But it also being the moon could well reference the changing nature of their love and the story, and the fact that everyone's going to die. Regardless, the fact that he's talking about being unable to go back suggests an important turning point leading to a domino effect, marking this pre-chorus as our Act 3, where in the initial play Romeo has married Juliet, kills Tybalt and is exiled, and in this version Romeo is well and truly dead, and Zero Base One have complete control of the story. That's kind of scary. The second line and start of the third line here are also translated as "the idea that we can't be together, too late to turn back now," which expresses that them not being together is just that, an idea in the mind of the playwright Shakespeare, and also that they can't turn back since, well, they may control the script, but they can't and won't bring Romeo back to life. Next we have a repeated chorus and post-chorus which represent the rest of Act 3 as they double down on their control of the story and their murder of Romeo, and we move on to Act 4 with the bridge. How do I know this is Act 4? Well, first, Dewing sings about leaving this place. This makes the most sense in terms of Act 4 when Romeo is exiled and Juliet makes her plan to flee Verona. The act ends with her supposedly dead body, her plan to escape, being found.
The shattered moonlight also makes sense here in multiple ways. For instance, Romeo swears on the moon, but when the moonlight is broken, their love is shattered, both in terms of Romeo being dead at this point, and in terms of Juliet supposedly being dead. Considering the moonlight has also been used as a motif in the song to represent the original story of Romeo and Juliet, and their love, life, and later death,
it shattering after the Zero Base One members have taken control of the story makes sense. The original story is literally shattered. Also, it makes sense for this pre-chorus to be Act 4 if we consider the final chorus to be Act 5, which also makes sense in the context of those lyrics. But let's talk about the lyrics themselves. They reinforce the idea of self-determination seen throughout the song, both in terms of Zero Base One and Juliet running away from Verona, and in terms of the members rewriting the story of Romeo and Juliet to create, quote, a world just for us, and a place where their dreams can come true. This also nicely subverts the end of Act 4 and the start of Act 5 in the original play, since in that version Juliet fake dies and the message to Romeo goes astray, cementing the misunderstandings that lead to Romeo, Juliet, and Paris dying. But in this version, the death of Romeo happened in Act 1, and the deaths of Juliet, Tybalt, Mercutio, and Paris have been averted. Finally, we move on to Act 5 with the final chorus. This is the culmination of Zero Base One's efforts, and they now have complete control of the story and are able to fly high. Probably in terms of the feeling of love making it feel like you're flying, in terms of being in a new utopia, and in terms of flying over and controlling the story like gods. I highlighted this section in red because, like I said, they now have godlike powers, and have seemingly created a utopia. But they seem to gloat in these powers, and the meaning of a utopia is a perfect place, but also an impossible place that doesn't really exist. So the way I see it, they're now abusing their power over the story to gain excessive control, possibly to the point of hubris. I mean, theoretically you could view this section positively, but maybe because I'm a TXT and ATs fan, I'm pretty predisposed to viewing things like this with a sinister undertone. Thankfully, the post-chorus is more positive, talking about love, running away, and being together, and it also has this nice line about dancing the night away. Dancing and celebrations are, to me at least, associated with the end of Shakespeare's comedies, especially A Midsummer Night's Dream, which literally ends with all of the couples going to a wedding. The post-chorus uses this to 1. Reinforce the idea that this is Act 5, the end of the play, and 2. To fulfill the members' promise earlier of changing the genre. This shows that they have successfully changed the genre from a tragedy to a comedy, which, as a Shakespeare fan, made me feel a great deal of satisfaction to see such detailed references, and also how the song foreshadows its own ending, which is truly Shakespearean. Then we have the na 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 outro and the final line, which is a final declaration of their control over the story, quote, I'm going my way. Surely you can see how this, combined with the get out of my way earlier, is a bit too powerful, right? Even the fact that they keep mentioning Romeo so many times after killing him makes it feel like they're mocking him. Anyway, that's the end of the song. So, to conclude, this song has its flaws for sure, and I think K-pop groups are more scared of changing the lyrics in the second chorus than they should be. But overall, lyrically, this song is an insanely cohesive and well-considered exploration of the various themes in Romeo and Juliet. I especially love the various references to Shakespeare and his plays in general, as well as how the song follows the 5-act structure, which adds so much more depth to it. Whoever wrote this must be a Shakespeare fan, or at the very least a Romeo and Juliet fan, to know all of these references, not all of which are immediately obvious from just watching the play be performed. And that is one of the many reasons I wanted to make this video. Romeo and Juliet is, in my opinion, one of Shakespeare's most poorly written plays, but it's still a Shakespearean play, and this song definitely does it justice. So with that said, let's move on to how the lyrics and concept were interpreted in the choreography. So, for some unknown reason, Zero Base One actually haven't released a dance practice video for Kill the Romeo, so I'm forced to use some whole group fan cams and hope I don't get copyrighted. But that won't stop me from analysing it. The choreography for Kill the Romeo is the second thing that made me really want to talk about it, because I think it really nicely adapts the themes and story of the lyrics into a dance format, while also being fun, energetic, and powerful. Also, there's tons of Gunnook, so of course I'll like it. This performance also leans hard into the murder and suicide elements of the original play, and references it in several ways. Guns, poison, strangulation, you name it. Poison is obvious, Romeo uses poison. Strangulation? Not so much, but gestures towards the neck are common gestures to reference either murder or suicide, so this makes sense. Guns. Now, guns are an interesting one. They're obviously a lot easier to communicate with gestures than swords, but they have one other fun detail. The arguably most well-known adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, the 1996 film by Baz Luhrmann, uses guns. Hence, this is a film reference too. How fun. Now, for ease of editing, I decided to use this M Countdown performance, since the Tume full focused performance still has a moving camera. Now, the odd thing with this performance is that everyone seemed completely dead. This performance was a super strange experience to watch because, well, like I said, they seemed dead. There were tons of mistakes made in this performance that just should not have been made, and which the members don't make in other performances of the song. Not to mention that they were super out of sync with each other, and this, combined with their vastly differing energy levels, made the performance feel really messy. Although I think at least some of that is down to the fact that certain parts of the choreography just are messy, and with no cool camera angles to cover them up, this becomes even more obvious in this performance. Another reason I hypothesize for why this performance is bad is that, based on my previous research of music show stages, I believe that groups perform at least 3 times at music shows. Often the actual on-air performance is spliced from 3+ performances, and the individual fan cams and full cams are often different from what was shown in the edited performance. I have also hypothesized in the past that the full cams are filmed last, which would make sense since they're technically the least important thing to film, and since idols consistently look more tired and make more mistakes in the full cams than in the aired performances and their fan cams. If this is true, it would make sense why Zero Base One looked so clumsy in this stage. Regardless of all of that, this performance made me realize how unsynchronized they are for a K-pop group, even taking into consideration the exhaustion they were probably feeling. I don't think any of the members made any attempt to adjust to each other's dance styles and skill levels. The only other group I've seen where no member adjusts to the other's level and it works is ATEEZ, and even then it only works because they have good stage presence and have made it their brand. Zero Base One just don't have the brand to keep up this lack of cohesion, and I think this is why I've always found their performances a bit lacking. Members are often out of sync with each other, or one or multiple members are doing slightly different things from the others for seemingly no reason. Actually, this was so bad that I started getting angry in the middle of writing my analysis. Like, they have no right being this unsynchronized. Members were often out of position or off balance, and yeah, the stage looked slippery, but that doesn't explain everything. The only reason I didn't rage quit is because I like this song and this choreography so much that I could just hold on to that instead of the rage. But like, can we give this choreography to TXT or An Team? They do it so much more justice. That said, I do feel like some of this poor performance outside of the exhaustion was probably down to the song not suiting certain members. Some mistakes were one-offs and it didn't happen in other performances, presumably then because of exhaustion. And some issues I had were consistent for this song, aka the synchronization issues. The studio Tume version is far better, probably because the Tume full focused cam is still edited, so if someone makes a mistake they can cut it out. Now, on a slightly more light-hearted note, I don't know if it's because this is a powerful choreography or if it was an organisational issue, but they all seemed to be adjusting their mics a lot. Hence, I have decided to start a mic adjustment counter. Spoiler, it's mostly Hanbin. Speaking of, Hanbin seemed super tired. One thing I liked about watching a full cam music show performance as opposed to a dance practice is that I could see the background scenes the whole time, and they were really interesting. I'd recommend having a look at this kind of thing if you're bored, because they had so many Romeo and Juliet references. The balconies, the moon, the roses, and they even, during Jiwoong's shattered moonlight lines, had these blots of colour that looked like they could be a shattered moon, and also possibly blood, because, you know, Romeo and Juliet. One thing I do want to note about Zero Base One is the interesting dichotomy of live singing. Jung Hao seems addicted to live singing and sings live in almost every performance he's ever given. There are some other members who sing live often. I most often notice Ganuk and Hanbin singing live too, but Jung Hao is belting over the backtrack almost every single time, as opposed to members like Yoojin and Gyuvan who seem to almost never sing live. Which honestly I don't blame them for with choreographies like this, but it's just another thing that makes the group seem more disconnected. Actually, I realised why I put this in the script. The thing that annoys me about members of lots of groups lip-syncing is not the fact that they're lip-syncing or like, yeah, they're disconnected as well. But even without that, Yoojin and Gyuvan can't lip-sync to save their lives, and it completely ruins their stage presence. Like, when they're singing live, their stage presence is so much better because they don't look like they're focusing on the backtrack instead of focusing on the performance. Another person who's been lip-syncing really poorly, and it's been really bothering me, is Xiaoting from Kepler. She can't lip-sync to save her life either, and like, she's got good stage presence, but as soon as she starts lip-syncing, she just loses all of it because she just looks so dead inside. I just thought it was interesting while I was writing this script. I had this reflection that it doesn't bother me that much if a group lip-syncs, like, whatever. But what does bother me is when they can't lip-sync well, and then they lose all of their stage presence because there's just no energy behind their words or anything. I also don't think Isna are very good at lip-syncing. Just while I'm thinking about it, I can't think of anyone else. I think Gyuvan, Yoojin, and Xiaoting are the big culprits, and Jiwoong has his moments where he lip syncs and it looks bad. Bahie has her moments too, but usually she's pretty similar with or without the lip sync. Yeah, fun fact, it annoys me. Now, despite everything I've just said, which may make me sound like both a Zero Base One hater and a Kill the Romeo hater, I do indeed love this song and this choreography, which is why I want it to be performed as well as possible. The choreography has, as I mentioned, tons of interesting interpretations of the lyrics, which include various references to Romeo and Juliet, both the play and other media, which is fun, you know. Like I said earlier, some sections are clumsy and could definitely be consolidated to better reference the play, but overall it's pretty stellar. Also, Gunnock was dancing so powerfully that I was genuinely surprised he didn't break an ankle during the dance break or something. So with that said, let's get into my actual analysis of the choreography. Start the mic adjustment counter.
Hi guys, this is Editing Casper. So when I tried to upload this video, CJE&M copyrighted the choreography analysis clip for this video using the M Countdown performance. This has never happened to any of my choreography videos before. You can see all of them still chilling on my channel. I can only assume it's because I used a music show performance, not a dance practice, but like I didn't have any choice, right? Anyway, obviously I disputed it because it's obviously fair use, right? But they upheld their claim. So what I'll do, I've cut the actual clip out of this video and I'll link it in the description. And I'd really recommend you go and watch it because it adds a lot of extra detail and context to what I'm talking about, right? Also, the choreography analysis sections, they take so much extra time and effort to edit. Like, that 6-minute choreography analysis clip probably took more time to edit than the entirety of the rest of the video. So I would really encourage you to go to the description and watch that clip, both because if you're interested in Kill a Romeo, it's an interesting clip, but also to support my efforts. For those of you who don't want to go and watch that clip, I'll still include the mic adjustment counter at the end, just in case you're interested in that. All right, let's get into the next section then.
Alright, now let's discuss their performances of the song. I want to talk about two things in this segment. First, their styling and performances and background animations on music shows, and second, their mama performance. I was waiting for them to perform Kill the Romeo at an award show, and I think I would have killed someone, not Romeo, but probably the Wake One executives, if they hadn't. But to my delight, it was the main portion of their performance at Mama 2024, a performance which added a lot of context to the song's story. But that's a bit too exciting for now, so let's build up to it by starting with something slightly less exciting, their music show performances. So to start, I just want to point out how cool the background LED screens are during many of these performances. Like I mentioned in the previous section, they include lots of nice references to Romeo and Juliet, moons, blood, roses, and so on, but I also like how these references are given their own twist based on the lyrics of the song. For instance, there are the previously mentioned ink blot / poison blot / blood blot moonlight images during Ji-Woong's part on M Countdown, and that same stage also shows the Capulet mansion surrounded by roses, but glitching. This shows two things. First, it ties the 16th century play to Zero Base One in the modern day, and their Cinema Paradise album. These glitches are the kind you might see on a TV screen when it gets old or has a bad signal, that kind of thing. Hence, Cinema Paradise taking over the old play. Also, the glitches show how Zero Base One and their modern perspective on the play are taking over and corrupting the story of the original play, since, they kill Romeo. Now that's pretty snazzy, but themed background screens are a pretty normal part of K-pop. Let's talk about something I find significantly more snazzy and exciting, the styling. Obviously, most of the time for Kill the Romeo performances, Zero Base One were styled in pretty typical dark concept boy group outfits. Lots of black and white, lots of leather or pleather, and lots of arm cuffs and belts and buckles and all of that jazz. Not super exciting, but conventionally hot and romantic to most people, so overall this is pretty typical of a Romeo and Juliet themed song, right? And that's what I was thinking as I watched them promote, until they performed on Music Bank on the 30th of August. And this performance blew me away, because I genuinely can't see this wacko styling as anything other than a reference to the aforementioned probably most famous Romeo and Juliet adaptation, the 1996 film Romeo plus Juliet, starring Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes, directed by Baz Luhrmann. I mean, there's nothing else this really could reference, right? But yeah, honestly, I was kind of primed to expect this anyway, since there are guns in the choreography, and the most well-known use of guns in Romeo and Juliet is probably in this film. For those of you who tragically have not seen this culture-defining film, it adapts the story of Romeo and Juliet to a modern setting, being set in the 1990s in a relatively high-class fictional American beach suburb, Verona Beach, and makes all of the changes you'd expect would be made when we move this story from being set in 16th century Italy versus 90s America. Lots of capitalism, shirtless dudes, wacky hippie things, and lots of gunfights and drive-by shootings. I mean, why use swords when you could use guns? Probably the most iconic imagery of the film, in my opinion, outside of the very iconic poster of Romeo and Juliet kissing, is the various gunfights, conducted while both sides wear Hawaiian shirts coloured in various levels of outrageous. Once I saw the guns in the choreography, I, and probably most audiences, were primed to think of this film, and this stage, which clearly emulates the iconic brightly coloured shirts of the film, just solidified that interpretation for me. Obviously, it has to be toned back to some extent, they're K-pop idols after all, but the stylists got pretty close. I mean, Jiwoong, Yujin, Tere, and Matthew especially look like they've almost just walked out of the film. Even their jewellery is pretty similar in style to the jewellery and necklaces Romeo wears in this movie. Speaking of, I also love how they gave Gunnock this shirt with a blue top and red bottom. It peeks out between his t-shirt and jacket like he's showing his true colours. Red and blue are typically associated with the Capulets and Montagues respectively, so I can only assume that this is yet another reference to Romeo and Juliet. But also, this kind of looks like he's wearing a blue shirt that got stained with blood, like he killed someone in one of those aforementioned gunfights, or maybe got killed. Pretty cool, right? He also has a necklace almost identical to the one Romeo wears in the film. Maybe he is Romeo and got killed. Rip. Oh, can I just say, editing Casper, when I did my analysis later on, they actually are Romeo. So, Gunnock literally is Romeo. Anyway. Okay, my appreciation of Gunnock's stylist aside, this performance's styling was pretty cool, and made me love the song even more. Not only did the song reference the play in great detail, but the performances also referenced iconic moments from the history of the play and its adaptation. This performance was followed up by two other well-styled performances, one on show Music Core on the 31st of August in which they wore these denim outfits, which could conceivably vaguely reference the 1996 film, but which, more excitingly, sort the boys into both red and blue groups, Capulets and Montagues. Because I have no life and like staring at the smallest and most meaningless details, I documented which are which. Gunnock, Jiwoong, and Matthew are the Capulets, and Yujin and Junghao are the Montagues. Hanbin and Tere are both ambiguous. Hanbin has both colours, and Tere has an orange shirt, so maybe he's a Capulet? Ricky and Gyuvin aren't really part of either group, so presumably Ricky is the prince, or Friar Lawrence or something, since he has this massive tan coat. Gyuvin could be a Montague, he has denim pants, but so do most of the Capulets, so interpret that how you will. Actually, you know what? We need more Montagues, so let's just say Gyuvin's a Montague. So this was another well-styled performance I appreciated, and they ended up going 3 for 3 because the next day, the 1st of September, we have another cool performance on Inkigayo, which seemed similarly inspired by the 1996 film, especially with Matthew, Tere, Yujin, and Gyuvin's styling. Now, honestly, could these performances have referenced a suite of films and adaptations, not just the 1996 one? Could they have referenced other famous Romeo and Juliet adaptations like West Side Story, especially with the denim outfits? Yeah, for sure, but, and you may find this hard to believe, I am a big Romeo and Juliet fan, but I'm not a big enough fan to know every iconic or important reimagining of the story. And I haven't actually seen many important adaptations like West Side Story. So, I wouldn't know if these outfits were making references to those medias. One thing I can say is that I have seen And Juliet, and the styling definitely isn't referencing that. So yeah, I just wanted to mention how cool I found it that this song is about a play, right? But just by making super simple changes, slapping a Hawaiian shirt on Matthew and Jiwoong, a necklace on Gunnook, and an imaginary gun in Ricky's hand during the chorus, the song completely shifts from being explicitly about a play to being implicitly about a film. Even the lyrics of the song which reference the play work well here, since the film uses a modified version of the play script and is in Shakespearean language. This also makes this well-known play reference fit nicely into the Cinema Paradise album. How cool is that? Okay. Enough excitement about their Hawaiian-style shirts for now. Let's talk about the big boy, the mama performance. Like I said, I would have killed someone if they didn't perform Kill the Romeo at least one end-of-year award show, and thankfully they didn't disappoint, making a performance all about Romeo and Juliet. This performance is really important since the song didn't get a music video, so this performance basically serves that purpose, showing us what the explicit story of Zero Base One's interpretation of Romeo and Juliet is. The performance starts with a VCR which tells us the start of the story, using a mishmash of lines from the original play and, annoyingly, with subtitles only in Korean. I know it's supposed to create an atmosphere, but the combination of the soft speaking, music, and the fans screaming makes it borderline impossible to hear what's being said. But I, with the power of my Romeo and Juliet play script, have figured it out for you. It says, O Juliet, death that hath sucked the honey of thy breath, hath no power yet upon thy beauty. Thus with a kiss I do choose death. O Romeo, dost thou think we shall e'er meet again? Juliet, for such a treasure as thee to the farthest shore would I sail most willingly. This but begins the woe. Fire-eyed fury be my behaviour now. Alas, I am fortune's fool. Romeo's and sorrow who do awaken 1,000-fold, the same grievous curtain rising, losing beloveds and slaying themselves in wretched despair. Only one path to kill this fate. After which they show the lines, though fate would seek to part them, true love shall bear the strength to sunder destiny itself. Which is the most wacko, disgustingly out-of-order mishmash of lines from the play, Americanized sections, and fake non-lines I've ever seen, but at least it's very thematically interesting. Let's discuss. The first section of this is Romeo addressing Juliet's supposedly dead body in her tomb, and is relatively faithfully taken from the original Act 5 script. Basically, death has currently had no effect on her beauty, which is kind of obvious and ironic since she's actually alive, so of course she wouldn't be looking dead yet. The whole thing is full of death, both in this stanza and the entire speech. Romeo's line, thus with a kiss I do choose death, is said in the original play, coinciding with him taking the poison and dying. It's basically a representation of how he loves her so much he'll kill himself, and how their love is sealed in both life and death. Next is Juliet's single line in this speech, Dost thou think we shall e'er meet again? The fact that she only has one line is very canonically accurate, as while Romeo monologues on and speaks a lot, Juliet tends to be very shy, quiet, and demure. In the original play, this line comes as Romeo flees the city and Juliet wishes to meet him again. It, and her vision of him dead, foreshadows how they won't meet again. Next is Romeo's response. Note, by the way, that we've been going back in time this whole time. Romeo's first lines were in Act 5, Juliet's line was in Act 3, Scene 5, and Romeo's lines here come from Act 3, Scene 1. The effect of this is that we start with the dramatic consequences of their, or Romeo's, actions, their deaths, and then flash back to their parting, and then to Romeo's fight with Tybalt, which set in motion the dominoes which fell, leading to their deaths. Brilliant. Anyway, Romeo describes his love for Juliet, and then how his fight with Tybalt and his own fiery conduct or impulsiveness began the woe of the play. The I am fortune's fool line in the original play comes as Romeo realizes he's killed Tybalt, and thus,
doomed himself to death at the hands of the prince, aka started the domino effect. Then we have the omniscient narrator who describes the thousands of universes where Romeo and Sorrow met in death. Hilariously enough, he doesn't mention Juliet, since really, the main character of the play and of Kill the Romeo is Romeo. Regardless, this is a cycle of violence and tragedy across thousands of timelines and universes, and Zero Base One need to, quote, kill this fate, aka prevent the version of Romeo they inhabit from dying. Then, the final two lines, shown on screen as the performance begins, are pretty straightforward. Love will be what they use to kill their fate, or, more gothically expressed, quote, sunder destiny itself. I shouldn't need to tell you that this whole thing is wonderfully gothic and wonderfully non-linear, and since I love gothic non-linear stories, of course I'd like this one. Hi guys, this is Editing Casper again. So, similarly with the choreography analysis section, when I tried to upload this video, CJE&M copyrighted the Mama performance footage, which I was using as B-roll footage for this. So, similarly with the choreography analysis section, I've clipped this section of my video and I've linked it in the description. If you're someone who just listens to my videos, then it won't make any difference to your experience and the audio analysis is still in this video. But if you also want to watch the Mama footage, which I put to give context to what I'm talking about, then that's linked in the description.
While the voiceover is doing all of this, we get some very gothic visual context. An altar with candles, presumably Juliet's memorial, which Eugen approaches and cries over. Very Romeo tragedy. Cut to Jung Hao, who is implied to have just taken the poison that kills Romeo. Okay, pause. This VCR does something I love, which actually most Zero Base One music videos do. Basically act like all 9 members are different facets or versions of the same person, in this case a Romeo stand-in. We flick between them as the same character, I love it. Anyway, Jung Hao as Romeo has poisoned himself and flashes back to the Capulet party, where Romeo walks around looking for Juliet, presumably. Cut to Romeo preparing for battle with Tybalt and more poison drinking. As the narration switches from the conversation between Romeo and Juliet to the commentary on the story, we have this wonderfully dramatic montage which repeats the story we just saw over and over. As the narrator says, in countless universes Romeo meets Juliet and kills himself, symbolized by the chalice of poison and the members who are tied up with red ribbons. But we finish with this epic shot of Eugen. Then we see the members, again with red ribbons, in the place where Juliet's memorial used to be, which coincides with the line, only one path to kill this fate, demonstrating the concept of the song, showing that their interpretation of Kill the Romeo is not necessarily to kill Romeo himself, or even just to kill Romeo, but is instead to kill the fate of the original plot, which is what we saw in the lyrics when they talked about turning the tragedy into a comedy. Then we see our 2 lines about true love sundering destiny, a reinforcement of the previous section, that they intend to change their fates, with red feathers shown. The feathers are interesting. They're red, aka blood, and they could be part of a masquerade costume, aka the Capulet feast where the 2 lovers meet. And they're from birds, relating to the end of the song where they fly high. Very snazzy. Anyway, they're also used as a motif to tie this VCR to the performance, since we move directly from them to Jung Hao covered in feathers, reminiscent of being dead and buried, or coming out of a cocoon, showing how Zero Base One transformed Romeo by replacing him and his destiny. Hence, we get a nice dance intro and a very dramatic intro of the other members in their hoods. Also, Gunnock. Hell yeah! I was so hyped. Anyway, they then perform the start of the song. When we get to the chorus, Ricky has this odd added line, "I will take over you," which, combined with the pause right before where he seemingly prepares his weapons, probably doesn't actually do what you think it does. There's dual meaning here. Most people probably interpret his words as taking over Juliet romantically, but based on the VCR, the lyrics of the song, and so on, I think he's taking over Romeo, as in possessing Romeo's body, and the arming of the weapons is the group preparing to destroy the original play. Fun, fun, fun. Anyway, while they continue, let's talk about the styling. It's award show season, we obviously can't be running around in Hawaiian shirts, but that doesn't mean it isn't exciting. The colour scheme is black, white, and red. Black and white are elegant colours for award shows and are opposites, like the opposite sides the two lovers are on, and red is, of course, blood, passion, and love. The members also have these bits of glass or mirror sewn into their outfits, which are, of course, glamorous, but also vaguely poignant. What are the reflections? Their destiny being seen through the mirror? The many facets of Romeo which the different members represent? Their shared destiny? The sheen of the poison that kills Romeo or the blade that kills Juliet? Am I looking too far into this? Possibly, but still. The last thing I want to mention is that, although I would have adored it if they went way harder on this, there are the barest hints of medieval style fashion here, tying the styling closer to the Gothic image of the performance. I think the most obvious example is this stitching on Tere's jacket, which just evokes medieval fashion and, oddly enough, corsets for me. Other potentially medieval inspired elements include their leather belts, buckles, and so on, the braids on Hanbin's shoulder, which are military style, Junghao's glove/arm cuff, the sashes some members wear, and Matthew's jacket, which looks like an archery sleeve. Like I said, I wish the stylists went way harder and went all out on medieval fashion here. Maybe something more like Crush? But I guess I appreciate the hints to it anyway. It's far better than nothing. Anyway, we then get to the bridge, after which we have a dance break initiated by my guy Gunnock, which leads us into a fight segment showing the members as Romeo fighting their destiny. Oddly enough, Gunnock starts this off with a katana? In an Italian story? He looked cool, I'll allow it, but the Gunnock-based mistakes are starting to add up in this episode. Then we get Ricky and Jiwoong fighting shadows, and also each other. I like to think that, based on their previous material, the Zero Base 1 members are fighting each other for control of Romeo's body and of the story, but goodness knows what the intention actually was. Then we cut to Hanbin and Matthew with their masquerade masks. I don't know who made this decision, but whoever decided to put this part of the dance break on the artist's lounge made a good choice. The butterfly and garden arrangements add to the magical atmosphere of the Capulet feast, and they gave all of the idols seated a mask to wear too, so the performance seems a lot fuller. Also, I bet the idols had fun being part of this. Then we're back on the main stage as all of the members come together, at which point we get Eugen still stuck above Juliet's memorial covered in the red ribbons. Thankfully for everyone involved, he's able to get himself free, indicating how the members have been successful in changing the genre of the play, and he gives us this very sweet smile. And then we transition into Good So Bad via a Eugen road movie dance break, which in this performance represents the end of Kill the Romeo, where the members fly high. This also makes sense with the blue and white colour scheme of Good So Bad and their changed outfits. And yes, before you ask, this performance did follow a 5-act structure, same as the song. It just replaced acts 4 and 5 in Kill the Romeo with the mini road movie dance break and Good So Bad, which I think is pretty snazzy. So yeah, this performance takes the place of a Kill the Romeo music video and nicely explains Zero Base 1's interpretation of the story and lyrics. They embody and take over Romeo fighting his destiny, and deliver themselves a happy ending with Juliet. How sweet, I guess. Anyway, top 10 mama performances of all time based on pure concept. So hopefully you can see why the performances of this song made me love it even more than I already did. And that's all well and good, but believe it or not, I have more to discuss about this song. Yep, that's me. A blabber. Let's have a quick speed round of other things I liked about this song, which I will also use as a good chance to recap what I've said in previous sections. So, above all else, I love how literally every part of this song references Romeo and Juliet in some way or another. The lyrics, the choreography, the styling, the background screens, the performances, Literally everything. And you should really know by now that I love my references, especially Shakespearean ones. The audio track visualizer thing is also pretty cool, with a modern Romeo and Juliet holding hands under a sliver of moon in the Capulet Garden. This simple image has tons of references. The curtains of a play stage which have a medieval design, reflecting, how Zero Base One are breaking the fourth wall. The roses, the sliver of moon representing Romeo's fading love, the Capulet Garden, nighttime, the dominoes falling in the background, and a dagger and a vial of poison, the things the two used to kill themselves. But the fact that they're wearing glasses makes them, like I said, modern, which makes sense since this is a modern interpretation of the story where they didn't need to die. They also take turns knocking the dominoes down, and the dominoes alternate between blue and red, showing how, well, they both contributed to the domino effect of the conflict between the two families. Good old Romeo and Juliet references. So, speaking of references, I also obviously like the lyrics, choreography, styling, and performances, as mentioned earlier. I also like the song itself sonically, and I love the fact that this song of all Zero Base One songs was the one where Gunnock is treated as a second center. Hell yeah. Speaking of, one thing I really like about watching Gunnock perform for every single Zero Base One song is that sometimes he changes the choreography of his part. I think he did his part slightly differently almost every single time for In Bloom. In this performance he doesn't do it as much, but for some performances of Kill the Romeo, he kind of throws his hand forward at the end, and in others he shoots the audience. Very violently. Now, obviously I think it's fun that he changes his part, and obviously I like Gunnock, but this gun just doesn't make sense. Why would he shoot the audience? He would be far better off either 1, shooting himself, or 2, drinking poison. The latter especially would be brilliant because it would prime the audience to think of the poison drunk at the end of the play. This in turn would help them understand the end of the choreography where Jung Hao rejects the poison and chooses to live instead, going his own way. This would create a great contrast between Gunnock referencing the original end of the play and Jung Hao showing how Zero Base One have rejected that. Theoretically, shooting the audience is still a reference to death, and it could be Romeo killing Paris, but it isn't quite as strong, and I don't think Gunnock meant it that way. On one hand, I can't expect Gunnock to be as much of a Shakespeare fan as me, and to have considered this enough to change his choreography in aid of the storyline. But on the other hand, considering how nerdy he is, and how he was literally making historical literature references during Isaac and Chinese warlord references on Boys Planet, yeah, I can expect him to be nerdy and intelligent enough for this. Gunnock, you've erred again. You are so lucky you're my bias. I thought I put this in the script, but apparently I didn't. I also wanted to shout out Ricky here, because Ricky changes his choreography for almost every performance. I don't think he does anything storyline-wise with it. It's just the thing where he kind of pumps his arm up and shows his muscles, right? But, shout out to Ricky for changing his choreography too, because I find that fun. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention here is how I love how much Kill the Romeo contributes to the theming of the Cinema Paradise album. As I mentioned in part 1, the Cinema Paradise album just isn't nearly as good as it needs to be to live up to the standard that Kill the Romeo sets. Sure, the album is good, in fact very good. I don't think Zero Base One have released a single bad album, but just good doesn't mean best albums worthy. Like I said earlier, the Cinema Paradise album is ostensibly about the greats of film history. All marketing around the album suggested it was about film and cinema in all of its forms, but it just didn't live up to this. Good So Bad was meh, and while it contributed to Zero Base One's concept in ways I'll discuss later, the music video seemed to be trying to reference tons of different films and tons of genres of films, which would be good and was good, but I wish they would have gone harder on it, and many of those references could also be considered references to literally anything else. I have no clue what Insomnia, Eternity, and The Sea were doing on this album. A better music video for Good So Bad could have tied them into it as different types of movies, but I feel like it was just a little bit off. I mean, this is editing, Casper. The Good So Bad music video was really good for their concept, but it wasn't very good for Cinema Paradise. I'll clarify that more later. Road movie is cool, and I guess it is a form of cinema, but I feel like it should have been emphasized more. And Yuri Yuri's music video brings in a lot of cool drama references, but it didn't even originate on this album. Even Kill the Romeo is an odd choice, since Romeo and Juliet is a play, not a film, but I'll let it slide since the song goes so hard on squeezing out every single possible reference to the play, and also consistently references the 1996 film, which is, well, a film. I don't know, maybe the album needs to grow on me before it can be a best album? I mean, it's good, but it's not the best. I'll probably get there eventually, but right now I'm obsessed with Kill the Romeo. That said, Kill the Romeo massively contributes to the album and was a very good choice for a B-side, since it delivers the references that the rest of the album promises and to some extent fails to deliver on. Hence why I believe it deserves to be on the list of best songs. And with that somewhat happier note, we reach the end of my analysis of the song. Finally! Let's talk about something interesting. Theories about the song and the album. Okay, so first things first, I looked at the two main behind videos for Kill the Romeo, the Mama behind and the Studio Tune behind videos, and neither included any nuggets of lore. Unfortunate. There also seemed to be no theories about the song or even really the album on the English-speaking internet. The closest we come to is PD from Form of Therapy, who reacted to Good So Bad, but didn't really make any theories, certainly not any relevant to Kill the Romeo. This makes sense. PD isn't a theorist, but a producer, editor, and filmmaker, so I don't usually go to their channel for theories. But I was desperate, guys. Anyway, PD's video was enjoyable and informative editing-wise, but not very useful for this, and I'll link it in my reference document. But they are Gunnock biased, so no wonder I like their videos. I'm kidding, I liked their videos before Zero Base One even debuted. There were several Zero Base One storyline theories floating around on the internet during their debut era, since In Bloom very solidly established a video game concept for them, but there are literally zero Zero Base One theory channels or blogs that I could find. So I guess this means that not only am I, to my knowledge, the only Just B theorist on the English-speaking internet, and now one of the only Kepler lore enthusiasts, I now also have to become one of the only Zero Base One lore enthusiasts/theorists. Well, to be fair, I guess it would be a Gunnock biased person who would become the lore person. That just makes sense. Anyway, so like I mentioned earlier, the most consistent theory surrounding Zero Base One's storyline or semi-storyline is that they are in a video game and each comeback is them progressing to a new stage. And this mostly makes sense. Obviously, In Bloom is a video game, and Crush and their later comebacks have many similar elements. Glitching between worlds, surreal and absurd elements, transformations, pausing the world around them, taking on different personas, etc. But I think all of their music videos and albums can be better categorized more broadly. They're not necessarily video games. Instead, they're all classic stories, and some of these stories are expressed in video game form. For instance, although this list drastically simplifies it, In Bloom is a dating game, Crush references King Arthur, Feel the Pop is an absurd western that becomes a summer sports film, Good So Bad is a series of romances where the members rebel against the writer, and Blue is a coming-of-age film which references The Matrix and has a final scene that honestly feels straight out of a Thai BL. All of these music videos, including their B-side music videos, have video game references and elements. I mean, even Kill the Romeo kind of has it, with the whole rewinding of the story over and over and over. But they're far better explained as just being a series of stories the members are involved in, at the whims of the writer who controls them. In almost every single video, the members break the fourth wall and rebel against the story in some way. In Bloom, they break the game. In Feel the Pop, they blend multiple worlds in a weird dreamscape. In Good So Bad and Kill the Romeo, they literally tear up the story to make their own, and in Blue they return to their origins, manipulating their video game world to create their dream world. Now, I would ask next how Kill the Romeo fits into this, but it's pretty obvious considering what I just said. Kill the Romeo is another archetypal story they're involved in and rebel against, and is honestly the perfect B-side to accompany Good So Bad, in which they literally do the same thing in a slightly different context. So yeah, they don't have a linear storyline that Kill the Romeo contributes to, but they do have a concept of being controlled and then writing their own stories, which Kill the Romeo definitely fits into. Congratulations to Zero Base One. Unsurprisingly, they already have a far superior storyline to Kepler, and they've managed to do one of the main things I suggested to fix Kepler, by having a consistent concept even if it is subtle enough that their fans don't really latch onto it. Zero Base One can come back with a completely different sound for every album and still maintain fans, because all of these songs are very Zero Base One by concept. Also, they can do my favourite thing, use media references as storytelling shortcuts. I can't express in words how much I love how K-pop does this. K-pop's ability to so skillfully use storytelling shortcuts is something that I think it does consistently, and consistently better than probably any other music industry, and is one of the things I think has contributed most to its success. Along with the creation of content machines and parasocial relationships, of course. And of course, Zero Base One have got that down. Okay. Enough blabbing for now. We can come back to this when we get around to actually analysing their albums. For now, let's wrap up the video. Kill the Romeo will probably always be my favourite Zero Base One song. I like the sound of the song, and although I'd like it regardless, I like the fact that it's packed full of Gunnock. He takes the pseudo-center and main vocal positions I believe he deserves. But most of all, I like the fact that it has so many cool references to Romeo and Juliet in all of its forms, both in terms of all the forms of Romeo and Juliet, and in terms of all of the forms of this song. The lyrics, the choreography, the promo art, the performances, the styling, and so on. Everything is full of Romeo and Juliet references. I think probably the best part of this song, reference-wise, is how it goes so all out on the references to the point that, lyrically, sonically, and performance-wise, it literally follows the 5-act structure of the original play. That's an insane level of dedication. I can really tell that the people who were creatively involved in this song like Romeo and Juliet, and their love of it really paid off in the final product. So why does this song deserve to be on the list of the best songs? I mean, you should probably know the answer by now, but still. In this video, I've talked about how the lyrics, choreography, and performances of the song, as well as other details like the aforementioned promo art, all contribute to an incredibly cohesive final product with great depth. The song puts a modern spin on Romeo and Juliet and fits nicely into the rest of Zero Base One's storyline and discography, thus contributing nicely to and helping define the concept of both the album Cinema Paradise and the group. Although I may well analyse the whole album one day, I think Kill the Romeo is the standout track on said album and is another great example of how K-pop is inspired by previous media to create interesting and unique products. I also like how it's the kind of song that is engaging for the fans. It seems like a romance, a prime target for boy groups, but has hidden depth, by contributing to Zero Base One's concept of tearing apart stories and creating their own from previously cliched plots. Also, Gunnock, duh. Outside of On Guard, I reckon this is the Gunnock song. Anyway, considering the majority of my audience seem to be Zeroses, I hope you all enjoyed this. Please let me know if you'd be interested in more Zero Base One analysis or theory videos, since I guess I am now destined to become the only Zero Base One theory YouTube channel. Regardless, that concludes this video. Thanks for watching, I hope you learned something, and I'll see you in the next one.